The DFS Studio is brought to you by DraftKings. Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast with your hosts, Kyle Borganoni and Matthew Betz.
Welcome in to the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. This is not Kyle Borganoni, as you all know. It is Matthew Betz here to break down the slate with a very special guest. Kyle is somewhere on a beach. He's got his toes in the sand, a drink in his hand. I'm not sure if he's playing DFS this week, but he's not here. And so to break down the slate, the Week 6 slate, I brought on Pete Overzet of Fantasy Life. Pete, how's it going, man?
It's going good, man. I love Thursdays because that's when I finally dig into the DFS slate and start running some optos and, just looking at all the pricing and all of that. It's so funny how things change because we do the first look show on the Swolecast on Tuesdays, and it's like my memory is completely wiped by even Thursday. So excited to dig into it with you.
Yeah, it should be great, man. And as of our recording, like you said, it is Thursday. This is obviously out on Friday mornings. So I was kind of going through the slate, and we'll talk about cash here in a little bit. We'll talk about some tournaments as well as a few props today, but there's a lot going on as far as injuries, so make sure that you are plugged in the DFS Pass this weekend. We will have best plays up on Saturday for you guys. I'll hop in Discord as well if you guys have questions. So make sure you are plugged in because, as always, there's a lot going on the slate from an injury perspective. But before we dive into all of that on this slate, Pete, just tell the people where they can find all your work, like highlight kind of what you do in the fantasy space, anything you've got going on in the DFS space, and just your background with DFS. So like, are you more of a DraftKings player, a FanDuel player, cash, tournaments, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I playing DraftKings DFS was one of the first things I started doing for content, and this was back when I was really bad at DFS, and I would review my lineups like after the fact, and I do this Monday morning review. Those were up on Roto Grinders back in the day, and I literally was back then just like clicking buttons, like barely looking at projections, and tried to get better. And over the years have improved as a player, and now I play even more on Underdog, the weekly draft games, but I actually really like how the stuff informs each other. Obviously, you can have a chalk play on DraftKings who is just like not even getting drafted in an Underdog weekly draft. And I end up liking it also from like a portfolio perspective of like, hey, I'm really heavy on these guys on Underdog, but then I can get exposure to these other guys in DraftKings where it makes more sense. So I love it all. Salary cap DFS, I will say, because of Sims and how powerful the tools are now, I feel like some of the process has gotten more streamlined, where I don't necessarily have to devote as much time to, fiddling with a lineup shell because there's so many ways to shortcut that. But I kind of like approaching the slate from a macro perspective and then seeing where do the plays line up best on which specific site.
Love it. Yeah, I've actually been doing a couple of those Underdog drafts as well. I don't focus on them just because so much of our content is geared towards getting folks ready for FanDuel and DraftKings each week. That, Saturday morning comes around, I'm hanging with the kids or whatever. Sunday morning comes around, I'm just hanging out. I'm like, you know what? Let's hop on Underdog. Let's do a couple of these drafts. And they're fun. So yeah, hop in there and check that out. It's just another way to play DFS and have a little sweat on the weekend. If you want to jump into the DFS Pass, don't forget you can go to dfspass.com. You can use the promo code DFSPod, save some money on that when you check out. As we always joke on the podcast, it is still too cheap. It's been the same price for about 6 years straight. Just inflation's getting us. And I think we're losing money every time someone buys one of these. So make sure you check that out if you want to get more. But Pete, let's hop into our cash picks.
Straight cash, homie.
All right. So on this slate, we have 10 games, 5 in the early window, 5 in the late window. And for me, I'll just jump in at quarterback, kind of where I see things going here. We're going to talk about the Ravens and the Commanders on this game from on the slate rather from a game stack perspective. But for cash games for me, I just feel so safe spending up for Lamar this week. 7.8 on DraftKings. He's quite expensive over on FanDuel, so I'm not as much in love with that. But the matchup with Washington certainly is there. He is leading all quarterbacks in rushing this year, and you also add in the fact that they have the highest team total on the slate at 29.5 points. Obviously, very, very healthy. The matchup is good. How do you feel about Lamar versus someone like, let's say, Jalen Hurts for cash this week on DraftKings?
Yeah, I think that one is going to be an interesting one because I think the savings are pretty significant from what I've seen just kind of messing around with optimals, that $600 down from Lamar to Jalen Hurts. And yet the game environment, the form for this Ravens team coming off of a big week, it definitely feels a lot cozier. But I do kind of agree with you. Like, I'm more interested, I think, in punting at quarterback this week. We can talk about maybe my quarterback lean, but if I am paying up, I almost would like to just not deal with the risk of the Eagles. They've looked bad. Yes, they're getting, Devontae and AJ Brown back this week, but even versus Cleveland isn't the nicest matchup. Like, is Cleveland really going to be able to push them? So I'm with you. I think if I'm paying up, I definitely would prefer to go to Lamar or even Jaden Daniels, despite Hurts projecting pretty well.
Yeah, I have the same concerns. We talked about that on our Tuesday show a little bit with just, I keep losing money playing some Deshaun Watson stacks because the matchups have been great. He's cheap. And it's like, man, eventually he's going to connect with Amari on these unrealized air yards. And it just hasn't happened. So I just think he's broken. I'm not sure they can fight back as much in this spot. I think they're 9-point dogs as of our recording on the road in Philly. So I do have concerns about that from the Cleveland side of keeping pace with Jalen Hurts and just the game environment. Whereas, Jaden Daniels and the Commanders, these two offenses, number 1, number 2 in points per game, number 1, number 2 in e-pay per play. So you could see this just go back and forth. Obviously, you can throw on both defenses. So I like that take as well. Did want to mention quickly before we get to your punt guy, who I'm also sneakily kind of into this week. Dak at 6.7 on DraftKings just feels safe in this spot against Detroit, where, the story for the last 2 years has been you can't really run on them. For the most part, Dallas's run game is broken anyway, and we know they want to throw. So I just want to point him out in the mid-range. He looks quite strong if you want to build your lineups that way. But if you play Spencer Rattler at 4K, the Stoneman on DraftKings against the Bucks, you can do some very, very fun things with your lineup. So talk to me, talk to the people about Spencer Rattler as a potential cash play at $4,000.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are kind of familiar with the dynamics at play of why this pricing happened. Obviously, with the Derek Carr injury happening on Monday night. I think if this had happened on Sunday during the main slate, Rattler would have been priced, 4,800, 49, 5K, maybe even a little bit higher, just because this matchup isn't too intimidating here. So we're getting essentially like $1,000 discount on what his true price should be. And I think that's going to ultimately play out as him being the best value play on the slate, like specifically from a points per dollar standpoint at 4K, he's going to project for 15 to 16 points, which may not win you a tournament, but in cash games, what it allows you to do for getting in all of the other best plays and just knowing how high floor a lot of these quarterbacks can have. I think that he looks like the best bet right now for salary savings. And we can talk about the other positions, but I'm not seeing a ton of other really good value at other positions, which makes me think I might have to lean towards saving at the quarterback position this week.
Spencer Rattler, $4,000. What could possibly go wrong? No, I'm with you. And the thing about this, we need to kind of shift our mind away from like the redraft leagues of like start sit to in cash games, like at 4K, can he give us 12 to 16 points? And I think I remember last year there was a slate where Aiden O'Connell got the start, surprisingly, and he was 4K. And man, I didn't know anything about Aiden O'Connell. I was like, how bad could this be? I think he came out and he put up like 12 and a half DraftKings points in cash to 3x your salary and allow you to get up to the guys you want at wide receiver, running back. Like, it kind of worked. And I think like the point you made with the dynamics on DraftKings this year specifically compared to past seasons, every week I would log in and there's like, okay, there's like 3 to 4 guys. Like, I feel kind of excited to play in the 3K, 4K range at wide receiver this year. As soon as we get below 5K, I'm like, I don't want to click any of these guys. So yeah. Rattler at least lets you avoid that whole situation. So that's the argument for him. Now, I will say just team level concerns, like the offensive line is a train wreck. The matchup is good, but we know Bowles will blitz. So like, I do see a floor outcome here in like tournaments where he gets you 8, 9, 10 points and you're like, that really didn't work. But in cash games, that could be fine depending on how the slate shakes out. So yeah, I think he's in your player pool, and it's just a matter of how you want to build on this slate. Let's move to running back. And, staring us in the face at $6,600 is Bijan Robinson, and he gets the matchup. Taking on Carolina, they are favored by about 6 points as of our recording. The last couple weeks have not been ideal, sharing some time with Tyler Algier. I know that he was on the injury report in a short week. Last week, hamstring issue. Week prior was a shoulder issue. So my take is if those things are cleared, we could see more work than what we're used to at these last 2 weeks for Bijan. But even if Algier is seeing 8, 9, 10 touches, the matchup is just too good against Carolina. So is Bijan, in your opinion, the top running back cash play on the slate?
It's close. think I think Pollard might honestly be just like
Tony
a
P.
little bit ahead of him. But yeah, it is really concerning for the Bijan stuff, to have his rush attempts really fall off these past couple of weeks, only 7 in week 4, 11 in week 5. His passing game role has remained solid. And he's still getting some of that, usage inside, the red zone that we care about. But yeah, it is concerning. And the reason I just don't want to just say he's an uber lock is just because I do think you need a touchdown from him to probably pay this off. I think that's what you're paying for, the tax there. And there's just a lot of ways, whether it's with Algier, if they're throwing a little bit more, where I'm just like, I just don't feel like he's a lock for a touchdown in the same way we would if like Jordan Mason, was in this exact same spot against Carolina, and then he'd be like minus 250 to score a touchdown. There's just enough going on with this team where I'm like, I think he's a good play. I don't want to call him like a stone lock that you have to have.
I think that's fair, especially when you consider that there are some pretty exciting plays just below him, in my opinion, in cash games. I personally, like, if anyone wanted to play Derrick Henry this week or Saquon, like, I get it, But I think the way that I'm leaning to build is this 6K range looks so strong. One of those guys to me, also Chuba Hubbard, who's just seeing so much work with Carolina. It's a good game environment. I believe the total right now, 47.5. It's one of the top on the slate. So it's a good game environment. He's involved in the passing game. But you just mentioned Tony Pollard, and I'm with you. 6K for Tony Pollard. Before the bye week, they just were on bye in week 5. Before the bye, they played the Dolphins, 22 carries, 88 yards, and a touchdown. And like his advanced numbers are actually pretty good as far as like tackle breaking, explosive plays, stuff like that. So Tony Pollard, 20 plus opportunities in 3 of his 4 games played this year at 6K. Taking on the Colts, the matchup is certainly there. Would you say, relatively speaking, like looking at Bijan at 6,600, Chuba at 63, and then Tony Pollard 6K, like price adjusted, you would rank Tony Pollard above those guys?
Yes, I think so. I think it's so close between Chuba and Tony. I think I would say those are my 1-2. You could order them however you want, and then I'd put Bijan at 3. And then the other thing that comes into play, I think, with Bijan for cash is how many Falcons are you willing to play? Because a lot of other guys, London, Mooney, look like really solid cash plays too. You could even include McLeod, I think, in there as a potential salary saver. So at that point, you start to get a little worried, right? Like you think, are the Falcons the team that you want to have 3 guys in cash from? It's not like the Niners where you're like, okay, I'm fine having 3 of these. So that's the other thing I think you wrestle with Bijan, is if you're using other Falcons.
Yeah, that's a great point. That was kind of the decision point last week. It felt like where people showed up to cash with a Jordan Love triple stack, with all those guys in the value.
Yeah.
And sometimes that hits and it's great, but other times, like if the team fails, I mean, you're done. So that is a factor to consider. It brings me absolutely zero pleasure to report that Najee Harris is projecting well again. It's not been pretty. Jalen Warren still banged up with a knee issue. Cordell Patterson already ruled out. Taking on the Raiders, they just put Christian Wilkins on IR, their stud defensive tackle, and they were already getting crushed in the run game as is. So, the way I'm talking about it, people kind of know my feelings on Najee. I played him in cash 2 weeks ago against the Colts. Was the most painful experience of all. Just watching him kind of, lumber along for 1.8 a carry was tough. Is he in the pool this week, though, for you at 5,800 in this matchup?
Yeah, I think he should be. It's funny, we were talking about kind of the differences between like Underdog and DraftKings, and like Najee's basically going undrafted in Underdog drafts. And I love him over there because it's like half point PPR. The guy is due for some positive regression. He's averaging 10 points a game. And yet he hasn't fallen into the end zone yet this year. He's got 70 yards or at least 70 yards on 16 carries or opportunities a game this year. So like the workload is there. Like you mentioned, Raiders defense, not in good shape. Warren doubtful. Cordell Patterson out. He is not like the warm, comfy play you normally gravitate to in cash, right? Like that's the thing there where I view him more through like this tournament lens of like, man, if he could have the big game, but the floor is really low. And there's so many different ways, whether it's Justin Fields at the goal line, whether it's this game just dudding, they were using, who is the other running back they were using the other night too? Like there's ways for this to go wrong. I do think he's on your short list, but I would prefer not to have to go to Najee in cash.
Yes, that is a fair assessment, I think. I forget the guy's name. He was an undrafted guy. I forget where he went to school, but he's been kind of getting that RB2 role, a couple touches a game. with Warren and Cordell Patterson banged up. But yes, he is a fun story in and of itself. Over on FanDuel, just want to point out the Sunday night game is included as it's been all year. Still waiting to see on Zach Moss, but if there is no Zach Moss, Chase Brown is 5,400 taking on the Giants. I think he would be a very, very strong consideration over there. Tony Pollard also a very good price. Chuba a very good price. Kind of the same guys for me over on FanDuel. Let's move to wide receiver here. And at the top, I think there's two incredible strong plays in CD and Amon-Ra St. Brown. When I kind of was going through this, when I was building, I was getting more Amon-Ra just in optimals and kind of just how it works with the $500 savings. That said, CD is in an awesome spot. Do you have a lean between those two guys in the slate's best game environment? 52.5 total, Detroit and Dallas.
Yeah, I think I would just slightly lean, all things being equal, to CeeDee Lamb. There's this element to the Lions offense this year that feels very similar to the 49ers, where they have so many good weapons, so many ways to beat you, that the floors are lower from the top dogs than normal. And I think it's been a little disguised, between what's gone on with the Lions offense this year. We've already seen some dud games from Amon-Ra when Jameson Williams really stepped up. And so if I'm looking for safety, I'm not going to, slander Amon-Ra's ceiling in this environment, but if I'm having to choose who is the higher floor play, I think it's definitely CD this week.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. And, just from the football guy takes, Detroit funnels the targets of the slot wide receiver, move CeeDee Lamb in. Also a little squeaky wheel narrative, right? Like the sideline stare down last week on Sunday Night Football we all saw with Dak and CD. I think Lamb's just going to get absolutely peppered here. In the mid-range, if you drop down to the 6K range, this is where the strength of wide receiver is for cash games, in my opinion. You've got Chris Godwin, 6,800. You've got Drake London and Darnell Mooney in play this week. London is 6,700 on DraftKings. The Moon Man, Darnell Mooney, 5,300. Obviously, the matchup is there. Is this an either-or situation for you on Atlanta pass catchers? Like you said, Ray McCloud even is consideration. I think he's 4,300. What a world we live in. Those guys are all cash viable. Is this a max 1 in cash, a max 2? Where do you lean that way in terms of how you would build?
Yeah, I don't think I would want to have two pass catchers from the Falcons in cash. And I do think the best way to kind of get, the best of both worlds, like the floor, but also the ceiling, I do think it's Darnell Mooney, right? Where it's a great spot for Drake London, but he has been, Darnell Mooney is right on par with him on the season, 8.8, targets per game for London, 7.8 for Darnell Mooney. And then Ray's down there at 5.8. I feel like there's a little more variability to Ray McCloud, specifically with, did they continue to try to get Kyle Pitts more involved? I think that probably comes at the expense of Ray a bit. Whereas, man, Darnell Mooney is the 1B here. It's almost kind of like the Shaheed and Olave situation in New Orleans. So to me, price adjusted floor ceiling combination, I think Darnell Mooney is the way I would gravitate.
Yeah, just for context, the target shares are basically identical, 26% for London, 24% for Mooney. So factoring that in and then the savings, I do kind of have to agree with you there. Now, in that same game, and we're going to talk about this game preview in a bit, but you can already hear us talking about basically every player in this game for cash. So this game is going to be wildly popular. We'll talk about that for tournaments. But in the same game, Deontay Johnson looks quite strong, 6,100, taking on the Falcons. Obviously, it was a predictably down week for the pass game in general against the Bears, who are just awesome defensively. But in the two games prior with Andy Dalton, 14 and 13 targets for Deontay Johnson. Is he a guy that you're plugging your cash lineup this week?
I think so. I think he would be the first guy I put in my cash lineup. And I think you nailed it. If he was coming off of, if you just reordered his games and the Chicago game was earlier this season, Deontay Johnson would have been 70, 80% rostered in cash, maybe even higher, just because of the recency bias. And now we actually get a matchup that is pretty good here against this Falcons defense. So yeah, his role this year is so much better than it has been in years past. This isn't just PPR merchant stuff underneath. They're using him downfield. They're using him in the red zone. They're, getting him even a few carries. So I think the floor ceiling combo on Deontay is awesome. I know he's been just a teeny bit banged up, but as long as he is getting in full practices here down the stretch, I have zero concerns with Deontay Johnson.
For sure. And then the last guy on my list, and again, this is the point I was making with DraftKings this year, is, Ray is kind of the lowest that I would go currently with what we know for injuries and that sort of thing. But Josh Downs at 5,500, we know Michael Pittman is a candidate for IR, so he's out this week. He's going to miss multiple weeks. we're still waiting on Anthony Richardson versus Joe Flacco, which please be Flacco for Josh Downs, who Downs has been so good on a per route basis, just earning an insane amount of volume. You'd remove Michael Pittman's 26% target share, and it's not difficult to see a path where it goes so well for Josh Downs. So did want to point out he is 5,500 this week in a very decent, I would say decent spot, given the slot matchup against Tennessee. He'll avoid L'Jarius Sneed. Let's kick it over to tight end. And again, always in DraftKings, every year, it's like, okay, let's log in. Let's see who's 2,900 in a somewhat okay matchup that's going to give me 6 targets. This year, that does not exist. And as of our recording, I'm looking at this, seeing the best, quote unquote, best play is Jake Ferguson, but he is $5,000. And it makes me sick to think about playing 5K tight end in cash. But we already talked about Dak. I think they're going to throw a ton in this spot. And Ferguson has kind of been operating as the mostly second guy. I know Tolbert's emerged a little bit, but mostly second guy on the offense, taking on the Lions. The other guy I have on my list is Cade Otton.
Yeah.
Usually he is leading the NFL in routes run and doing nothing category, but he's actually been very, very involved recently, has a 20% target share over the last 3 weeks. So do you have a lean on those two guys, like pay up for Ferguson in the game environment or punt it off with Cade Otton?
Yeah, I think I'm more on the punt option, because if I'm paying up for 5K, I like Ferguson, despite his role being better, I still want to approach Ferguson from a game standpoint. Like if that game goes nuts, I want Ferguson. I want all the pieces. I don't necessarily want to chase the floor of Ferguson at that price. I'd rather almost just find the 700 up to Trey McBride, who's earning a ton of targets. I think he's the safer play up there on the high end. So that does lead me to Cade Otton. With you, the other name I'll mention alongside Cade Otton would be Zach Ertz. Again, it's not as fun as Cade Otton, because Cade Otton's actually had a sneaky good target share over the past 3 weeks, but the Ravens have been really bad against the tight end. This is a really good game environment. It's to me like Zach Ertz is the less sexy version of the Jake Ferguson play, and you're saving $1,800 to do it. So yeah, if I'm punting, I think Otton and Ertz look pretty good.
Otton and Ertz, putting your cold hard dollars earned on these two guys. What could possibly go wrong in cash games?
Lots.
So many things. Do you want to point out over on FanDuel, Ferguson looks like a better value, relatively speaking, price structure over there, $6,100. He's in play for cash for me on FanDuel. At defense, it's sort of the tale of two stories here. You could spend up, which I almost never do in cash, on defense to the Eagles, in my opinion, at 3,400, taking on Deshaun Watson. Taking the most sacks in the league, looks lost, looks broken, 9-point road dogs, very, very tough spot. If you play Spencer Rattler, you can make that work. So that's the decision point for me. The other option is to play the Bucks at 2,600 against Spencer Rattler. And I'm guessing you would say, Pete, if you're going to punt it with Spencer Rattler, you are not playing the Tampa defense.
Yeah, that's probably even with cash games where you don't worry as much about that negative correlation, that is probably ruins kind of the thesis there a bit. So yeah, you'd probably want to use Bucks if you're not using Ratliff. I think I'd also mention, if you're trying to go cheap, two I would mention would be the Titans. I don't love this spot for Joe Flacco. And one note I was just going to mention when you were talking about Josh Downs, he missed another practice today, which is a little concerning. So if he comes into the game questionable, already down Pittman, it could be kind of a gross spot for them on the road. So I don't mind Titans defense, who's actually been playing pretty well too. And then even New England at home, 2,400. I know Stroud is good, but without Nico, that offense hasn't shown quite as much juice. They might get Joe Mixon back, so maybe that helps them. But I think the Patriots defense at 2,400 could get there. But yeah, I would say Bucks, Titans, Patriots would be my 3 go-tos under 2,600 or 2,800.
I like that Patriots take. We're not going to talk about that game as much, but it is a gross total. I mean, there's a lot of variance there in that situation as well. Good point on the Josh Downs thing. Make sure you're tracking that news super closely on Indy. They have so many injuries. And the Titans have been good. They're number 1 in EPA per play. Defensively, they've been awesome. So yeah, Titans have been good. Over on FanDuel, Tampa also in play, 3,700. Again, just taking on New Orleans. We're excited about the price, but we do see a world where it does not go well for Spencer Rattler this week. All right, Pete, let's take a break from cash games here. We're going to jump into games we're going to stack here in a minute.
Stack Attack.
Okay, it is time. The cash games, it's fine, right? It's fine. The people want to know, Pete, how to win $1 zillion this week, and you've told us that they're guaranteed to do that with your advice. So let's jump in to the first game here on the slate. A 52-point total. Baltimore favored by 6.5, taking on the Commanders. They are at home in this spot. I already talked about some of the main storylines here. These offenses are number 1 and number 2 in EPA per play. Their games combined are an 8 and 2 to the over. So there have been so many points in these games. It's been fun to watch both these guys play, Lamar and Jaden Daniels. Let's start on the Baltimore side here. We talked about Lamar. Obviously a very, very good spot. If you are going to play Lamar in tournaments, I assume the stack partner just easy is to go right to Zay Flowers. Is there anybody else you have interest on in the Baltimore side? It's obviously been a grind and a painful experience for Mark Andrews. And as someone who has him at an insane rate in best ball, it is a bad year for me in best ball. But where are you at with Lamar stacks this week taking on Washington?
Yeah, I agree. I think the best stacking option is Zay Flowers. He's been really consistent. He was close to some even bigger plays last week. And, if a game gets nutty, like the game did with the Bengals in the Ravens last week, I think Zay is always going to be a pretty big beneficiary of that. So he would be the one. And I'm, as we talk it through, like the one thing, and this with DFS tournaments, just tacking on your tight end, correlating the tight end is never a bad idea with the big bet you're making. And I like what I've seen from Isaiah Likely. And I know we've only seen really the 2 big spikes in week 1. And then last week he has the 2 touchdowns. But to me, even with this tight end committee, if I'm just trying to hunt for, I get the insane game environment, who is a big beneficiary? I think we've seen it twice, like in the 2 big game environments for the Ravens. Likely's the one who's come along for the ride. And I know it's not fun playing a guy in a 3-way tight end committee, but at 4,500 and just knowing that they really like him in the red zone, I think if I were making multiple Lamar teams, I'd maybe want to have one skinny with Zay and then maybe one double where I just toss in a $4,500 Isaiah Likely.
Yeah, I don't hate that take at all. And hey, man, that's maybe a way I can get even on my Mark Andrews best ball exposure.
Seriously.
What's funny is I have both of these guys are number 1, number 2 for me in exposure this year. So I was like, okay, after week 1, I was like, I can sleep tonight. I have a ton of Likely. And then just seeing Mark Andrews literally go from, one of the best plays on the slate every week as far as ceiling to 3,900, just a few $100 more than Kate Otten is true pain. But I like that take. I think Rashad Bateman is kind of sneaky. Now, he did pop up on the injury report Wednesday with a groin issue. I'm looking as of our recording Thursday. I don't see anything, but make sure you're monitoring that. Kyle did point out Bateman does lead this team in targets throughout run against man coverage. Washington dead last in fantasy points per dropback against man coverage, coming off a game 458-1 on 8 targets last week. So I think Bateman is actually kind of interesting. He's 4,100 on DraftKings. If you did want to spend down a little bit in this game, get a way to get exposure, I think that is in play. But we cannot talk about the Ravens without talking about Derrick Henry, who is just absolutely crushing, especially in wins for Baltimore this year. He is averaging 21.3 carries, 147 rush yards, and 1.3 rushing touchdowns per game in their wins. Already mentioned, home favorites by a touchdown. So looking at like roster percentage and ownership this week, I was kind of expecting the big dog to come in, like 12, 15-ish percent. Looks like right now in large field, we're projecting around 8 to 9%. If that holds, I mean, sign me up. What are your thoughts on Derrick Henry this week?
It's tough at this price tag at 8K. And I think the reason it's tough is because his utilization isn't quite as nice as those top tier guys. Like when you go and you look at the Camaras and the Barkleys and even the Bijans, the guys who are getting a little bit more passing work, there's just ways it can go south for Derrick Henry. That said, I completely agree with you. I don't think he's going to get used a ton here. I'm guessing he comes in sub 10% ownership in this environment. Washington's been kind of a tricky defense to get a read on. They played really well in some spots. It's mainly been their secondary that's been more leaky than even their interior run defense. So yeah, I struggle with it. To me, I would rather play this through the passing options. And I guess the only other thing would be is if for some reason Zay and Lamar were like really chalky, then it starts to scream out to me as like big leverage. But because it doesn't seem like Lamar and Zay are going to be massive chalk either, I think I'm probably steering away from the big dog.
Okay, fading the big dog. What could go wrong? On the other side,
I've done it my entire life, and it mostly does go wrong. So,
oh man, it's such a painful experience when you see him rip off that 60-yarder. You're like, okay, pack up for the week. We'll move on to next week and try again. On the Washington side, the Jane Daniels experience has been so fun. And when you look at Baltimore, they are one of the most obvious pass funnels in the league, dominant against the run, and then also you have on top of that Brian Robinson missing practice on Wednesday and Thursday, so they've got a banged-up running back room against a defense that you cannot run on, which means we should see the pass rate spike for Jane Daniels. We should see the scrambles as a result spike when he drops back more. So Jane Daniels, he's 7,300. He kind of feels like he's a little bit in no man's land this week. He's the quarterback 2 in pricing over on DraftKings, so I feel like a lot of people are going to say, okay, I'd rather just play Hurts. I'll spend up for Lamar. I'll drop down to Rattler. That, Daniels isn't going to go unowned, but relatively speaking, I think he could fall through the cracks a little bit in this spot. So I have quite a bit of interest in Jane Daniels in this matchup. What are your thoughts on the rookie taking on the Ravens?
Yeah, I do as well. And I particularly like stacking him up with McLaurin. I know there's kind of the thought out there with these rushing quarterbacks, you don't have to force in the stack, but to me, the reason you don't have to force in the stack is because the floor is really good, of him rushing. But if he hits that huge ceiling, similar to what we saw with Lamar last week, it's because he's connecting on some of these deep shots. And, McLaurin's now coming off of 2 really good games, 18 points against Arizona, 17 against Cleveland. And both of those could have been way better. This guy just continues to fall down at the 1-yard line with some of these big plays. Like, a 25, a 30 burger is going to happen for McLaurin at some point this year. And look, after watching what this Bengals offense did to the Ravens secondary last week, I think it could be as soon as this week. So I think I already mentioned liking Ertz a little bit. I like kind of leaning into the stacks with these rushing quarterbacks because I think the field wants to shy away from it. But I honestly can't imagine using Daniels without McLaurin this week. I love that pairing.
Yeah, just to point out, Baltimore allowing the second most 20-plus air yard completions in the league. That is Terry's game. He leads the NFL in air yard share, does Terry McLaurin. So this is a match made in heaven on paper. I am with you. McLaurin will have 8 to 10-ish % roster percentage this week, but is not going to get out of hand like some other players. He's kind of sandwiched, right around like Drake London and Deontay Johnson. So it's kind of impossible for him to get outsized ownership, that he is going to be a price point pivot for me off of those guys on DraftKings. I love that take. As someone who's been a Terry truther for years, it's taken a while. It's taken 6, 7, 8 years to get here, but it's finally happening with Jane Daniels, which is very, very fun. So let's move on to our next game here. Arizona taking on Green Bay. This game features a 49.5 total. Green Bay favored by 5 points at home in this spot. Let's start on the Packers side of things. They were the talk of the town last week in DFS world. Everybody played Jordan Love. Everybody played Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft. The boys are back, but Romeo Doubs is back, and that changes things a little bit. And Christian Watson potentially is back. We'll see, limited Wednesday with an ankle issue. So what are your thoughts on the Packers here in this spot taking on Arizona?
Yeah, I was working on my DFS piece that goes up on Fantasy Life on Fridays. And the first thing I wrote up was what I called the flop lag stack of the week. And going back to the Packers after they burned everyone last week. And I do think the dynamic is a little different this week, like you said, with Romeo Doubs back in the offense. He is, when he's been with the team and not getting suspended for a game, he's running a ton of routes. And then Luke Musgrave, who was kind of forcing a split a little bit with Tucker Kraft, despite, Kraft really kind of pulling away and having that good game. But the pieces specifically that line up really well to me is a Jordan Love double stack with Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks. I feel like I probably don't need to sell people on Jaden Reed. Just awesome returns with Jordan Love this year. I mean, he's finished as the overall wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, and then wide receiver 22 last week when playing with Jordan Love. But Wicks, I think, is the way to make this work, where you kind of fade everyone reacting to what happened last week. He had those high profile drops, but his underlying usage is still really good. He had 25% of the targets last week, 40% air yards. And even with Romeo Doubs in the lineup previously, he is still earning targets at a high rate, has an awesome targets per route run. And we've just seen kind of the spread out nature of this Packers offense. I think anyone can hit, and the fact that people feel burned by Wicks, to me, he's the salary relief piece that makes this work. You kind of fade Tucker Kraft at 4,800 with that price hike in Musgrave, and I think you go right back to the Jordan Love double stacks.
I like it. Yes, Arizona, second lowest pressure rate in the league, and Jordan Love this year has been just trying to deliver the ball down the field. Like, he's not checking it down. He's trying to deliver these big plays, as we saw last week with Jaden Reed. So it is a match made in heaven. He'll have time in the pocket. He'll be able to deliver the ball deep. So I love this spot for Jordan Love. I'm glad you brought that up. Josh Jacobs, the matchup on paper is interesting. He's gotten a lot of work recently, especially last week. He's been good as far as missed tackles forced. I will just say, if I'm going to play this spot, like I'm with you. I kind of want to lean into Jordan Love just because Josh Jacobs in our early runs is projecting for around 18 to 20%. You could play a Love stack with a lower rostered Wicks. Reed will be somewhat popular, but nothing crazy, and get some leverage on Josh Jacobs. That's how I personally want to play it. And I'm with you on the Tucker Kraft thing. Last week, it was like, man, he's just so cheap. Let's just do it. But you get Dobbs back, maybe Watson, we'll see. 4,800 is a very different conversation than when he was 3,500 last week. So even though he's been great, in DFS, I think I'm with you on a potential fade there for Tucker Kraft, just given the price. On the Arizona side of things, shocked the world last week with the upset of the Niners. Kyler had that weird 2 weeks ago game where he ran for 3 yards and it was one rush attempt. And they said, okay, let's get off this. Let's go back and run more. Last week he ran a ton, and that was a huge factor for him. So I do have a little interest that the field isn't going to look his way. He kind of feels like he's in no man's land in quarterback pricing this week at 6,800. It's not the easiest spot to go on the road and play against Green Bay, but they haven't been incredible on defense, to say the least. You already mentioned Trey McBride, so I have some interest in a Kyler McBride stack this week. What are your thoughts here on this spot for Kyler?
Yeah, I don't mind it because I like this entire game environment. And, I think my preferred way to do it would be a Jordan Love double stack. You don't play Kraft and you play McBride as kind of the bring back and see if you can get a really nice kind of ceiling game from Trey McBride there. But yeah, I think you could do Kyler McBride stuff. The Marvin Harrison price tag is a little hard for me to come around on. And then it's kind of tricky to know, do you double stack Kyler? I think it's completely viable to just skinny stack it. But I still would, I think it's a game I want to game stack. So if I did go that Kyler route, I would want to have a piece on the Packers, just because I do think the Cardinals kind of need to get pushed.
Yeah, agreed on that front. I will also just throw out Michael Wilson's kind of sneakily involved. I don't think anybody is playing him this week, and I'm not going to lie, I don't think I've ever played him in DFS, so maybe this is the week if I get into a game stack here. Did want to point out on Marvin Harrison Jr., if you are going to play him this week, he is cheaper on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings, which always means he is an incredible value over there, relatively speaking. 7,000 on FanDuel for Marv. When he's kind of been relying on touchdowns, kind of fits how he scored anyway better for me, so if I'm going to play him, it's over there, but I'm with you. McBride is my favorite play on the Cardinals side. Missed a game previously, came right back, 9 targets last week. So McBride has been seeing so much volume. I am with you there. We have 2 more games to stack. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Alrighty, Pete, we got 2 more games here. Let's jump into Atlanta taking on Carolina. And, Thursday last week, what a game. But now that everybody, and I mean everybody, is playing Falcons this week in cash, this is a decision point for me on the slate with how much chalk do you want to eat? Is it good chalk? Is it bad chalk? We've already basically talked about every player on Atlanta except for Kirk Cousins, who I think is fine if you're playing a stack. But more of my conversation with this team is, how do you handle it in tournaments? Because Drake London and Darnell Mooney are going to be 2 of the most popular wide receiver plays on the slate. Bijan might be the most popular running back play on the slate. So how do you handle this in tournaments? Is it good chalk? Is it bad chalk? Where do you lean there?
Yeah, I know there's always nuance to all of this stuff, but if I were just making one team or, even a small amount of teams, I feel like I just want to X this game out and not play it in tournaments. Everyone's going to play it in cash. And we've just gone through 3 really good game environments: Dallas, Detroit, Baltimore, Washington, and Arizona. In Green Bay, it's I don't even think it'd be one thing if this game was head and shoulders the highest total, and it's man, you can't hide from this. You can hide from this in multiple other spots, and I actually think the paths to failure here are pretty likely, just from a full-blown shootout spot. And I think the trap here would be to fall for the safety of the floors that a lot of these guys are offering in cash, and assuming that's going to transfer to a potential shootout game. So to me, I think I'm going to just completely stay away from this game in tournaments.
Yeah, I think that's a good take. And if you do that, you're fading so much chalk that you don't have to get wild elsewhere in your lineup, that you can play, modestly owned guys. If you are going to play some of this chalk, which again, if you're playing a ton of lineups, 150, 20 max, whatever, like it's fine. Just make sure that if you are going to play some of these guys, Bijan, London, Darnell Mooney, like you're getting different elsewhere because they will be mega mega chalk in this spot. On the Carolina side, we mentioned Chuba, we mentioned Deontay briefly. Again, they're carrying a ton of roster percentage in this spot. Chuba for me, I feel like is an okay price point, okay chalk that I'm okay eating. Deontay, he was mega chalk against the Bengals a few weeks ago, and it felt like you just like knew it was going to happen. I don't know that I feel as strong about it this week. I do think he's a very, very good play, but again, it's just a decision point in terms of how you handle this game for tournaments. Like we said, it will be very, very popular. Sneaky, punt it off a bridge, no one cares, get me 8 points kind of play this week. Jatavion Sanders, did want to point out, is 2,600 on DraftKings. If you are playing this game and you want correlation, Tommy Tremble's in concussion protocol. In that game when Tommy Tremble went out, Jatavion Sanders, 75% of the snaps, he did see 5 targets. Now, I have no confidence that that's going to be sticky moving forward, but did want to point out he is a viable, cheap pivot in this range if you did want to get off some of the cheap chalk with like Ertz, K-Dot, and those types of guys. But I think we kind of said it all on this game. Is there anything else you want to chat through with Atlanta and Carolina?
No, yeah, I just think it's hard to play. I think I could see one of the things when I've been like running sims on my lineups that I've noticed, and I've actually been getting this a lot of weeks, is I'll have like a contrarian kind of like game stack or onslaught of a team, and then it will just jam. It'll be like put Chuba and Deontay on this team. And I think that would be the way I want to play it. As far as like, let me pick a side of Atlanta and Carolina and just say I'm going to get the block of points from these two. And I think that's just a little easier to do with Carolina. That's so concentrated with those two, whereas we know it can be a little bit more spread out. So I would not be surprised if I had a contrarian kind of stack or onslaught. And then it's like, all right, the Sims tell me that you just need to plug in Chuba and Deontay here and grab these points because you're already unique elsewhere. But I would just be very careful with how I attack that game.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one thing to consider with that game and the next game we're going to talk about, they are in the late window. So if you are planning to play some contrarian pieces early, you can either keep these guys in your lineup as chalk because they are good plays, or swap on the chalk if you've hit the nuts early on and you have some low-owned guys in the 1 o'clock window. That is a 4:25 kickoff is Atlanta at Carolina. Also in the same time slot is Detroit at Dallas. This is the game. This is the game everyone wants to stack. This is the game in a dome. 52.5 points, very healthy over under. The spread is just 3 points in favor of Detroit on the road here. I'm going to start with this conversation for me on the Dallas side of things, where I know the Rico Dowdle stuff was kind of fun on Sunday night, but I have absolutely zero interest in Rico Dowdle this week. A little bit of a price hike. He's only playing about half the snaps. And I just think, like, to me, last week when we looked at the Burrow matchup against the Ravens, to me, it's the same this week with Dak, where it's like, you can't really run on Detroit. Dak wants to throw. They want to throw it in Dallas. It just sets up so perfectly. So I was on Burrow last week a ton. I want to be on Dak this week a ton. And, the nice thing about him is CeeDee Lamb at 8,600. Yes, it's expensive, but with the way people are building in cash with all these 6K wide receivers, like it's tough to fit and you kind of have to like work some stuff around it with cheap plays. But he is going to be, I think, somewhere in like 9 to 12% range. And if that holds, like, oh my goodness, CeeDee Lamb in the spot just looks incredible. So where are you at with the passing attack here on Dallas? Any interest in Jalen Tolbert as part of those stacks?
I think that would be how I would want to play it. And I do agree with you. Like, as we talk through this, because that Carolina game is going to catch so much ownership, I really think that this Dallas-Detroit game, the field might overthink it, where it's like you look at the slate at the beginning of the week and you're like, this is the game of the week. It has the highest total, like explosive offenses in the dome. And then you look at how salaries work. And when you're running optimals, you're not getting a ton of this game. You have to kind of force it in there. And I think the way the slate sets up is people are going to live in the mid-range at wide receiver way more. You might see some like one-off CD and stuff like that. But to your point, I really like going to this game. Jalen Tolbert has been playing really well without Brandon Cooks in the lineup. I almost like the GPP bro in me, even though Ferguson projects so well, I kind of love the idea of like Dak and CD and then try to get like Laporta in at tight end. I just feel like he is due for a nuke game at some point and no one's going to be really playing him. But yeah, between Tolbert, Jameson Williams, Rico Dowdle, Laporta, there's so many like fun ways to access this game that aren't going to catch a ton of ownership.
Yeah, it's a great point. On the Detroit side, this is a spot that's super interesting because they come out of their bye week. They're healthy. They've got all their guys, Laporta, Amon-Ra, Jameson Williams, both running backs are in play. Like, it's almost like analysis paralysis where you're just like, I don't know who to click here, and you kind of move on. But like, I want to be aggressive and get overweight on a lot of these guys if I can. I will say the Dallas run defense in the first 3 weeks was a train wreck. Recently, they've been a lot better. Granted, it was against the Giants and the Steelers, but this does profile as a spot for me where like, I love Gibbs this week. 7K, like, it's expensive, but it's not too expensive. But also people are like, is it Monty at the goal line? Like, who's going to get there? We've seen this weird usage from Gibbs where like he hasn't actually had a ton of usage in the pass game in the last couple of weeks. But if I recall, like from the training camp period of the news cycle, like there was a lot of talk about we want to get him more involved as a pass catcher. We already know he's good at it, but he was banged up with the hamstring issue. They kind of slow played it. Coming out of their bye week, we already have Dan Campbell giving us some positive nuggets on Jahmyr Gibbs' usage. I want to play it before we see it and really be aggressive on Gibbs this week. So do you have a lean on Gibbs versus Monty? One guy better play than the other. Obviously, they're different prices, but where are you at with that backfield?
Yeah, in general, I typically lean to Gibbs because I'm just such a sucker for kind of the ceiling there. But I'm always probably shortchanging Montgomery's, big playability too, because we've seen him be able to rip off those big runs.
Sure.
But I think in general, I like the idea of like playing Gibbs in maybe more game stack stuff and then playing Montgomery more as like a one-off. If you're like Montgomery gets 2 touchdowns, Detroit has a lead, they get to kind of just play ball control. Maybe it funnels primarily through Monty. So I do kind of like that angle, but yeah, it is hard not to like what you're seeing from Gibbs. And again, because he's just priced just slightly up, right? It's the same thing as CD because he's not just like an uber smash value. It's going to keep his ownership way down. I'm seeing like sub 6% in some spots here. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think it's just, can you get enough salary to make this work? Let me throw a Galbraith takeout at you because sometimes we see this work out really well in DFS where if you have 2 pocket passers who maybe don't have quite the true ceiling that are expensive, because Goff and Dak are kind of expensive. Could you entertain a Spencer Ratliff at quarterback and then just play the rest of the game and just say, could Spencer Ratliff give me like 75, 80% of one of those quarterbacks? And then I'm able to fully stack this game up.
I hadn't actually thought about that, but that does seem interesting. Yeah. I mean, like we said, if he gives you, ceiling outcome, what would you say for Rattler? Like
25
points, 25
for ceiling.
If you gave me 25, I'd be doing cartwheels. But yes, like if that outcome exists, which I mean, Kirk Cousins just had a career day. I'm not comparing Kirk Cousins to Spencer Rattler, but like Kirk Cousins just had a career day against this Tampa secondary. They're allowing the second most fantasy points. Rattler could do it, and then you could spend up and you could correlate a CD and Gibbs or something like that. Because I do agree with you. That's the issue here is the salaries. Is how do you make this work? If you play CD and you want to play Amon-Ra, it's like no way. If you want to play CD and Ferguson and Laporta or Gibbs or whatever, like it's hard to do. So I like that call. I think that is an interesting way to play it on this slate. And if you can't make it work, you want to just do like a one-off mini correlations like, CD and Jameson Williams or CD and Gibbs or whatever. I think that's also in play. So bottom line is I love this game. It's tough from a salary perspective, which I think is going to keep ownership in check a little bit. All right. Any thoughts, any further thoughts, I should say, on Detroit and Dallas?
No, I think that, it's a game where because the salaries don't line up perfectly. I don't want to say it's like a game where you have to have a piece of it. But to me, it does have that kind of high-end outcomes that we saw from the Bengals and Ravens game, where I think there's a lot of scenarios where it goes way under, it's a bit slower. Dallas still hasn't found their form. Detroit's having success running the ball, and it kind of duds. But the scenarios where it goes nuke, I think you want to have some of the cheaper ancillary pieces. So I'm going to be giving a really long look at Jameson Williams and Jalen Tolbert, who I think are cheaper pieces, not going to be heavily owned. Both have big play upside, and see if that can maybe unlock some fun builds.
I like it. All right, Pete. People came here for one segment. They want to know who's breaking the slate.
Slate Breaker of the Week.
So I want to go a little off the board. I don't want to give like the chalk pick. And we've been talking about Spencer Rattler, and I'm going to go with one of his wide receivers in Rashid Shaheed, and he's only 5,600 this week. He has been operating as the 1A for this offense. Like, I know we all thought it was going to be Chris Olave coming into this year. He has a 26% targets per route run, a 27% target share. And obviously the criticism against him is, hey, Derek Carr's not playing. But to me, Derek Carr has been way more a system of this new Clint Kubiak offense, putting him in success, lots of the pre-snap motion, the play action. I think they can simplify things for Rattler, and I think Shaheed can beat this secondary down the field, and I think he can connect for some big plays. I love the combination of Shaheed's upside just with how he's used down the field, but then his target share actually gives him a higher floor than I think people are willing to give him credit for. Then you get this defense that just got tattooed for 500 plus passing yards to the Bucs, and I think getting Shaheed at really low ownership this week, not only to mention that stacked with Rattler potentially, I think it could just be one of those things we look back on and we're like, why weren't we playing the Saints wide receiver 1 with a 4K Stone Min quarterback?
Yeah, I like that take, and Shaheed, he's so interesting because I think for the last couple of years, he was just viewed as this boom bust guy, like throw him in your lineup and hope he catches a bomb. And you hit on it. Like, he has a 20+% target share in every game played this year, but he also gives you the deep targets, right? So it's like the best of both worlds. I don't mind that take at all. And like you said, if you play Rattler and you play Shaheed, you'll have enough salary to also play CeeDee Lamb, who is my sleeper good this week. Such an obvious spot, 8,600. He's too expensive to be optimal. He's too expensive to feel comfortable at your lineup that I think his ownership is going to be held in check. Detroit does funnel targets to the slot. We just saw a down game from CeeDee last week. Little John on the side with Dak. I think the squeaky wheel situation is in play here. And Dak at home, CeeDee at home, in the best game environment on the slate. I don't want to overthink this one. I think CeeDee Lamb breaks the slate. All right, Pete, last segment here. Let's jump into a little pick 6 on DraftKings.
It's time for Borg versus Betz, presented by DraftKings.
All right, pick 6. No sportsbook. No problem. You can just play some props on DraftKings with us. Normally, Borg and Betz is the segment here, but obviously Borg is somewhere else, not here. He did send me his picks, so we will keep this going through the season. We have a little tally, Pete, going here. Borg is 8-2 on his picks on the show. I'm 7-2, so the boys are hot, and the pressure's on to not lose this one. But I'm going to roll with Kyle's first one here. He is going with Kyler more than 33.5 rushing yards. His analysis is, what is this line? He's been over in 4 or 5 games, averaging almost 50 yards per game. He thinks the line is depleted because of the 3-yard rushing box score that we had 2 weeks ago. So he is taking the more than Kyler in an up-tempo game against the Packers. I will take Trevor Lawrence in the Sunday morning London game, less than 22.5 completions. Lawrence has been under this in 4 and 5 games. This is a brutal spot against Chicago's pass D that is number 1 in EPA per play, top 10 in sack rate. They've only allowed one quarterback to go over this line. That was CJ Stroud with 23 completions. So Trevor Lawrence under pressure, generally a terrible, terrible combination. Borg's second pick.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. No,
you go ahead.
Rico Dowdle for Kyle. Rico is so fun, and now Kyle just wants to dunk on him. Rico Dowdle, less than 61.5. He's going combined rush and receiving yards. He's been under in 4 or 5 games. It's obviously a very difficult spot to run on Detroit. And he's still only playing about 50% of the snaps. He's losing some work to, how do you say this guy's name? Hunter Lupke?
Yeah.
He's losing pass down work to that guy, which certainly doesn't help. So Kyle's taking the less there on Rico Dowdle's combined yardage. My last play, Justin Herbert, less than 189.5 pass yards, which is just painful because Justin Herbert, when he can throw, is so fun for fantasy. But I'm going to take the less on this line. He's yet to hit this line. The Chargers want to run the ball, 31st in pass rate over expectation. They play slow. They're 29th in neutral pace. So you have a slow offense that runs, and you're taking on Denver, who's allowing just 5.1 YPA, the 3rd best mark in football. So I will go less on Justin Herbert in this spot against the Broncos. Pete, any thoughts on those picks? Are those guaranteed to hit? Are those locks, as the kids say?
Yes. No, it's for sure financial advice. No disclaimer needed there. Yeah, that Chargers game is going to be so gross, and kind of always betting against the passing game there, I think makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. Sadly, I wish Herbert was unlocked. Sadly, he is He is not. So that was Borg versus Betz presented by DraftKings Pick 6. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now. Use code BALLERS. That's code BALLERS for new customers to play at $5. Get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Pete, we have done it. We have given people the keys to the slate. It's Rattler, it's Shaheed, it's CeeDee Lamb, and print money. That's how it goes, right? Any final thoughts on the slate? Anything else you want to plug for the people before we get out of here? Tell them where they can find you on socials, all the stuff you got going on in fantasy life, your YouTube channel, whatever you want to plug. The slate is yours here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I do a few kind of DraftKings specific pieces of content. You mentioned the piece that goes up on Fantasy Life. It's called DFS Awards. So I give out some superlatives, the vomit stack of the week. One I'll tease here. I didn't get to mention it on the show, but a little interest in a Will Levis double stack if you're really wanting to get gross this week. And then I do a show on my YouTube channel, Pete Overzet. You can just search that on Fridays at 1 p.m. That's a live stream with JM to Win, a super sharp high stakes DFS player from 1 week season, and pick his brain. And then I also do a cram for YouTube members. That's a premium paid show, but Sunday morning. So it's like, how much stuff changes overnight, news, injuries. And that show is to kind of catch everyone up on the latest updates, ownership projections, all of that good stuff. So that's Sundays, 10:30 a.m. on my channel as well.
Love it. Yes, everybody check out Pete's stuff. He does awesome work on not only in season, but next summer for best ball as well. Make sure you check out Pete's stuff there. He's a grinder, as they say in the best ball streets. Pete, this was fun, man. Appreciate you having me on. Everybody will be back next week on Tuesday to recap the slate. Look ahead to week 7. Kyle will be back. We'll talk through it then. If you want to play with us, go to ballersdfs.com, join the DraftKings League. It'll direct you to Borg plus Betz. I'll have a contest in there for us Sunday morning so we can avoid our families longer and then roll right into the main slate. Check that out. We'll catch you next week. Best of luck this weekend. We will see you for week 7.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 18 and over. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Void where prohibited. One per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.